My name is Marjorie Vale, 70 years old this winter, retired librarian, widow for nearly 2 decades. I've always believed that order and kindness could keep a family steady like books on a well-kept shelf. But that evening, under the thin drizzle curling through Charleston's Battery, the order of my life began to tilt. I carried a pecan pie still warm from the oven, its scent of butter and sugar drifting into the damp air. My old wool coat clung to me like a second skin. The walk up Celeste's brick steps felt longer than usual. Her house glowed with gold light, and laughter spilled out when the door finally opened. Mom Celeste's voice was sharper than I remembered. She looked beautiful, glitter dusting her shoulders, a flute of champagne in hand. Behind her, I caught flashes of people, her husband's colleagues, their wives, the sound of children's laughter that could only be my grandchildren. I brought dessert, I said, holding the pie a little higher. And the gifts for the kids. Her smile faltered. Oh, Mom, tonight's just family. I blinked. I am family. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Please, you'll make things awkward. We'll talk tomorrow. Before I could reply, someone called her name from inside. Celeste turned, hesitation flickering only for a breath. Then the door began to close. For a moment, I saw the edge of the hallway, the tiny red coat I'd bought for Nora, hanging on the rack. Then the lock clicked. The drizzle turned to steady rain. My fingers loosened, and the pie box slid from my hands, landing upside down on the step. The smell of pecans and syrup mingled with wet pavement. I stood there, rain cooling the skin beneath my scarf, waiting for the door to open again. It didn't. By the time I reached the street, the lights of her house had blurred into the mist. I walked slowly along the Battery, the waves slapping against the stone like a clock marking each step I'd taken to raise her, to love her, to end here. When I finally reached my porch, the key trembled in the lock. Inside waited the quiet hum of a single lamp and the faint echo of a holiday that no longer belonged to me. The house greeted me with the same stillness it always had, too tidy, too quiet, as if it had learned to hold its breath with me. The string of Christmas lights I'd wound around the window weeks ago blinked unevenly, one bulb dead, another flickering stubbornly on. I hung my coat by the door, the damp fabric brushing against the wall like an apology. In the kitchen, I set down my purse, the empty space around it echoing louder than any sound. I poured the cold coffee left in the pot and watched it reheat in the microwave, the bitter smell rising before it even finished spinning. The pie I had baked for Celeste sat half crushed in its box. I cut a single slice, the crust breaking apart in quiet resignation, and ate it standing up. It tasted like something that had once been sweet. The wind outside pressed against the windows, making the glass hum. I thought of the years when this same wind had carried the scent of chalk dust and new paper from the library where I worked, back when Celeste was still a child who ran through the stacks calling my name. After her father died in an accident on a slick highway when she was 12, I had built our life out of routine and resolve. I sold my collection of first editions to pay for her private lessons, skipped lunches to save for her college fund, typed scholarship letters at midnight. I told myself it was love, but maybe it was fear. Fear that if I stopped giving, she'd drift beyond my reach. I rinsed my mug and let the water run longer than necessary, the hiss of it filling the room. The clock on the stove blinked 11:47. Christmas Eve still, technically, though it felt like a season already gone. In the living room, I sat by the half-lit tree. The ornaments gleamed faintly, tiny mirrored worlds reflecting a woman I hardly recognized. I traced a finger along one of them and whispered, "You were the story I never stopped editing." The sentence lingered in the air, unfinished. as if waiting for the next chapter to begin. The next morning drifted in gray and slow. Rain still tapped against the windows, steady as a clock I didn't want to face. I had fallen asleep in the armchair, still wearing yesterday's clothes. The cold had crept into my joints. Even the cat refused to leave his blanket. I reheated the same bitter coffee, poured it into a chipped cup, and carried it to the table. The silence had weight now, something I could almost touch. I was halfway through sorting old mail when the phone rang. The sound startled me. Hardly anyone called these days. The number on the screen began with a +33. Foreign. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the button. Then I answered. Madame Vale. The voice was male, calm, carrying a careful French lilt. Pardon me. My name is Maître Lucien d'Harcourt, notary of Paris. I hope this is not an inconvenience. I straightened instinctively. I think you have the wrong person. I believe not. He replied, polite but firm. I represent the estate of Madame Eleanor Vale Moreau, a relative of yours. She passed last month? The name stirred faintly. Like a book, half remembered. My mother had once mentioned a sister who'd gone to France after the war. A woman no one heard from again, d'Harcourt continued. You are recorded as her sole surviving heir. There are matters requiring your presence in Paris before the end of the year. The estate has arranged for your travel and visa. It is, how to say, time-sensitive. It sounded absurd. You expect me to fly across the ocean because of a stranger's phone call. I understand your caution, he said. But this is no scam. Your birth name is Marjorie Ann Vale. Born in Charleston, 1953. Parents, Samuel and Ruth Vale. Correct, my heart stilled. He spoke each detail like he was reading from my own handwriting. I will send official documents and my credentials. He added, you may verify them independently, but please, do not delay too long. When the line clicked off, I sat staring at the quiet phone, the coffee untouched, cooling again. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the world washed pale. For the first time in years, I felt something unfamiliar move beneath my ribs. Curiosity, or perhaps the faintest pulse of possibility. By mid-morning, curiosity had overtaken doubt. Though I kept telling myself I only wanted to make sure, I slipped on my raincoat, tucked the note with d'Harcourt's number into my pocket, and walked toward the post office. The air smelled of wet oak and salt. Charleston was waking up slowly, delivery vans, gulls, the hum of an ordinary day that didn't seem to belong to me anymore. At the counter, I asked the clerk if international notaries could be verified. She didn't know, but handed me a pamphlet on fraud prevention and suggested the public library's computer lab. I thanked her, clutching the paper like armor. At the library, the old building smelled of dust and wood polish. Familiar and safe, sitting at one of the terminals. I typed Lucien d'Harcourt, Notaire Paris 6E into the search bar. A real website appeared, official seal, address, even a photograph of the man I'd heard on the phone. Beneath his name was a crest reading Ministère de la Justice, République Française. Still, my fingers trembled. Anyone could fake a website. I searched for Eleanor Vale Moreau next. A local newspaper archive flickered onto the screen, Charleston Nurse Mary's French officer, 1946. The bride's smile was unmistakable. She had my mother's cheekbones. My eyes. Beneath the photo, the caption read, Miss Eleanor Vale departs for Paris to begin her new life. My throat tightened. She was real. The computer pinged a new email from d'Harcourt. Attached were scanned documents stamped with blue seals, a testament bearing my name, and a letter of instruction for visa processing. Everything looked too official to dismiss. The printer whirred, spitting out crisp pages that smelled faintly of ink and possibility. I gathered them carefully, smoothing the edges as if they might dissolve if mishandled. Standing beneath the library's tall windows, light spilling over the paper, I heard myself whisper, "I'm going." The words hung there, small but solid, like the click of a latch finally opening. The airport smelled of coffee and anticipation. I had never been inside one before, not really. The last time I'd planned a trip anywhere, Celeste was still in high school, and the idea had died somewhere between bills and excuses. Now, I stood beneath a board flashing words I could barely pronounce, holding a ticket paid for by a woman I'd never met. Security was a small ordeal of confusion. Shoes off. Bag searched. Pie tins questioned, but the attendants were kind, patient with my nervous laughter. When I finally reached the gate, I sank into a chair by the window. A plane rolled down the runway, lifting into gray cloud, and my pulse followed it upward. Boarding felt like crossing into another version of myself. The ticket said, "business class," a phrase that didn't belong to my vocabulary. The seat reclined with a button. A blanket arrived folded like origami. I kept my hands in my lap at first, afraid to touch too much. When the attendant offered champagne, I almost declined, then changed my mind. The first sip stung pleasantly, sharp and bright. I thought of Celeste last summer, standing in line at a cafe, sighing over a $20 meal. "You really shouldn't spend money like that." "Mom," she'd said, "you don't understand value." Now, somewhere above the Atlantic, I looked at the bubbles rising in my glass and wondered if value had ever meant the same thing to either of us. Outside the window, clouds layered like fields of white linen. The engines hummed a steady sound that felt like forward motion, like proof. I took out a notebook from my purse, its pages still blank except for a grocery list. On the first line, I wrote, "Maybe love needs boundaries higher than altitude." The words steadied me more than the seatbelt ever could. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the plane carry me toward a life that was finally mine. Paris greeted me with the smell of rain and bread, soft, unfamiliar, alive. The taxi wound along the Seine, its water glinting under a silver sky. I watched the bridges pass like pages in a book being slowly turned, each one older than the place I'd left behind. When we stopped in front of a stone building with green shutters and a brass plaque, my heart fluttered. Maître Lucien d'Harcourt, notaire associé. He met me in the entry hall, tall and composed, a face lined by professionalism, but softened by genuine warmth. "Madame Vale," he said, offering a slight bow. "Your aunt spoke of you often." I almost laughed. "That seems impossible. I never met her." He smiled gently. "And yet, she followed your life as if she had." Inside his office, the air carried a faint scent of ink and lemon polish. On the desk lay a leather folder, heavy with documents. He opened it carefully. The testament, property deeds, bank accounts I couldn't begin to comprehend. Then, with deliberate hands, he lifted a smaller envelope and placed it before me. "These," he said, "are her letters to you." None were posted. Perhaps she preferred time to deliver them. The handwriting was elegant and looping. The paper yellowed at the edges. I read the first line aloud. "You cared for others. I built a life for the day you'd need care yourself." The words blurred. My throat closed, and the room seemed to tilt under their weight. Each letter contained fragments of my life. My college graduation, Celeste's birth, even the year the library burned, and I lost my job. Somehow, Eleanor had known. D'Harcourt poured water into a glass and waited quietly while I wept. When I could finally speak, I asked, "How did she find me?" "She kept the address your mother once wrote from Charleston," he said. "She never stopped updating it. He slid the final page toward me. If you are ready, we can sign the transfer. My hands trembled as I took the pen. The ink caught the light. A thin ribbon of permanence across the paper. For the first time in years, I felt something solid beneath the ache belonging, not borrowed, but returned. The phone rang just after dusk, its sound too familiar to ignore. I hesitated before answering, watching the city lights stretch along the Seine like gold threads in dark silk. Mom Celeste's voice wavered between practiced sweetness and accusation. I heard, "Someone said you're in Paris. Is that true?" "Yes," I said. "It's true." A pause. I could almost hear her calculating what to feel first. "I've been worried. We've been worried. I didn't mean what happened on Christmas. Everything was stressful. Why didn't you tell me you were leaving?" I traced the edge of Eleanor's letter on the desk. "Because you told me to get out." "So I did." She exhaled sharply. "Mom, come home. We can make things right. The kids miss you. We all do." The words should have soothed me, but they landed too neatly, too rehearsed. I imagined her standing in that same doorway. Perfect dress. Impatient eyes. "I'll see them," I said softly, "but I won't be coming home to the same life." "What does that mean?" Her tone lifted bright but brittle. "I've arranged something for the grandchildren, a trust fund. It'll cover their college, health, whatever they need when they're older." Silence. Then, the sharp edge I knew too well. "So that's it. You're giving everything to them. You can't cut me out like this." I looked out at the river, where the reflection of the bridge lights rippled but never broke. "I'm not cutting you out, Celeste," I said, my voice steady. "I'm drawing the line where love stops hurting." She went quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was smaller. "You sound different." "I suppose I am." The call ended without a goodbye. I set the phone down gently, as if it were made of glass, somewhere below my window. A violinist played a slow tune that drifted upward through the Paris night. It wasn't joy I felt not yet, but something cleaner, for the first time. The silence after my daughter's voice didn't ache. It simply was, and I let it stay. The morning air over Paris carried the faint scent of river mist and roasted coffee. I walked the familiar cobblestone path toward Darcourt's office, my steps unhurried. The bells from Saint-Germain chimed 9 times as I entered the stone building, and for once, my heart didn't race. I knew exactly why I was there. Maître Darcourt greeted me with the same quiet courtesy as before. "Madame Vale," he said, gesturing toward the desk. "You've requested to make adjustments to your file." "I have." My voice didn't shake this time. "I want to amend the terms." He folded his hands. "Patient. Tell me what you wish to do." I placed a small notepad in front of him, the same one I'd carried since Charleston. Its first page still marked with the words, "Maybe love needs boundaries higher than altitude." "I want to leave a portion to my daughter," I said. "But only if she never challenges this estate or pressures me or anyone else for access to it. If she violates that, her share is to go elsewhere." "To whom?" "To the children who still believe in stories." I said, "I'd like to establish a scholarship fund in Charleston literacy programs for girls from working families. Call it the Eleanor Vale Foundation. She built a life for me when I had none. I'd like to return the favor to others." Darcourt's smile was gentle. "A poetic kind of justice, Madame." He read the draft aloud, every clause crisp and final. When I signed, my hand didn't tremble. The pen glided easily across the paper, sealing what felt less like vengeance and more like release. As he placed the new document in the safe, light broke through the curtains, scattering gold across the polished desk. "It's done," he said. I left with a sense of quiet I hadn't known in years. Outside, cafe awnings were opening, the city stretching awake. I stopped at a small bistro near the river and ordered a café crème. While I stirred the foam, my phone buzzed 6 new messages, all from Celeste. How could you? You've humiliated me. I'm your only child. You'll regret this. The words glared up from the screen, furious and familiar. I set the phone face down, letting the sounds of mourning wash over me. The cup warmed my hands. The taste was soft, rich, deliberate. Now we're even, I murmured, watching the Seine catch the first light of dawn. Weeks passed quietly, as if Paris itself had exhaled around me. I spent the first morning of February opening windows to let the winter air sweep through Eleanor's apartment. The rooms had lost their echo. The walls, once faded ivory, now shimmered in pale sage, the color of calm I'd never known how to choose before. The scent of paint mixed with sunlight and a faint trace of the river below. On a small hook by the entryway, I hung a single brass key. I'd found it at an antique market near Rue Claire, engraved with looping letters that read, "Home." I smiled at the weight of it in my palm before letting it rest against the wall. My days filled themselves gently. 3 times a week, Madame Colette came for French lessons. Her voice carried the softness of a lullaby, but she was relentless with pronunciation. Each new phrase felt like reclaiming a piece of possibility. Je suis ici. J'existe. I am here. I exist. On Sundays. My laptop lit up with the faces of my grandchildren. No background noise from Celeste. No interruptions. Just the laughter of 2 children who still called me Gran. We compared pastries. My croissant to their peanut butter toast and counted the minutes as if they were gifts. One Sunday evening, after the call ended, my phone buzzed again. It was a message from Celeste. Just one line, "I'm in therapy. Maybe next Christmas." I read it twice, 3 times. The words were uncertain, raw in a way I hadn't seen from her in years. There was no apology yet, but there was a door barely open, but real. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I walked to my desk and placed a postcard of Charleston. Beside Eleanor's letters, a photograph of the Battery at sunset, the city I had once called the edge of my world, outside. Church bells marked the hour. The apartment glowed with the kind of warmth that doesn't need company to feel full. I traced the raised edges of the brass key, then whispered to the room. Love built me. Boundaries saved me. Somewhere in the city, a cafe closed its shutters, and a violin began to play along the street below. I listened until the melody faded into the sound of the Seine, steady and endless, a rhythm that finally matched my own.